So, Professor Marandi, Operation True Promise 3 is in full effect. Iran has launched hundreds of ballistic missiles toward Israel. Tel Aviv has been hit. Central Israel, quite significant military infrastructure, has been hit quite hard. Even the New York Times is showing footage of this. Both sides are saying that they are going to continue this as long as it takes. And the United States, of course, has sent its destroyers to protect Israel, but it seems like Israel's air defenses have been penetrated quite significantly.
Yes, as I said yesterday, the Iranians would respond, and they did respond. And they will continue to strike the Israeli regime, and those strikes will intensify until the regime backs down. There is no other way to end this. And it doesn't matter how much the United States and Europeans try to prop up this genocidal regime. The Iranians will be steadfast, and Iran will continue with great pride to support the axis of resistance and especially the people of Gaza. Iran won't change policy. And it's coming out that the Iranian air defenses are working much better than expected, or than what we initially were hearing in media, the Western media and online. And the Iranian missiles are getting through, despite the collective attempt to protect the Israeli regime. And also, it's quite clear that despite the fact that radar installations in Turkey, in the Emirates, in Qatar, in Bahrain, and in Iraq, and the airspace of, despite the fact that the airspace of Jordan is being used, the Iranian drone and the air capabilities are going to make life miserable for the Israeli regime. They've made it miserable, and they're going to make it more miserable. Last night, the Israeli regime continued to strike Iran, a building very close to where I live, very close to a studio that I often would be invited to by foreign media. They hit a building and killed 60 people, 20 children. So this is what the Israeli regime does. They are a brutal, barbaric, evil regime that sees non-Zionists as subhuman, and the West is no better. The collective West, the Western elites, of course, ordinary people are rising up and waking up and opposing this genocidal regime, but the elites, they are the same because they are supporting all of these policies. We saw how Western regimes even supported the Israeli strikes on Iran. So this is where things stand right now. I think that it's going to continue for a while, but it's clear that it's become clear that many of the sites that the Israelis they thought they struck, they were decoys. And I've posted a few images that I found on different channels or reliable channels where the Israelis showed footage that didn't have secondary explosions, and that shows that what they actually struck were decoys. So things are good. The morale among ordinary Iranians is high. People are very happy to see that Iran is responding, and but we're going to have to be prepared for tough days and perhaps tough weeks ahead.
The audience here is very concerned about your safety, Professor Marani. I want to remind people this is a war. I mean, we are at a stage of real war here, and so we are all definitely keeping you in our thoughts, Professor Marandi. And I wanted to also ask you your reaction now to what particularly Iran has been able to do versus what Israel has been able to do. The New York Times has admitted that much of Iran's nuclear facilities remain intact. The IAEA has said that they have not detected any nuclear leakage. And then you have reports that Iran has downed now 2 F-35 jets And of course, with this, what Israeli media is calling a devastating strike on central Israel, has hit hard Israel's what they call the Pentagon equivalent in Syria. So, your impressions of what Iran has been able to do and how you see this literal war in Iran engaging in pretty intense and historic acts of self-defense.
Yes, it is dangerous for Iranians, obviously, and I have been asked to leave my home. This is my home, but I think that it's best for me to stay where I am and to do what I do, and hopefully I'll continue to do so from here, unless the internet goes really bad, because it is not good at all. Uh, the Iranians have slowed down the internet for security reasons. So since yesterday, as you recall, the internet has not been very good, and I'm using my Wi-Fi. I'm using my cell phone internet rather than Wi-Fi. But in any case, um, I think that the Iranian air defenses have proven to be very effective, and I think one thing that we should keep in mind is that the strikes on Iran are strikes against a very large country. And Iran has assets spread out. And it's an enormous country, and its key assets are also deeply underground. The Iranians, as we've discussed on numerous occasions before, have for years been beginning a process, or they began a process for protecting its key assets in the face of airstrikes or drone strikes. So a lot of the most important assets that Iran has are very well protected, and therefore the Israelis have no access to our underground missile bases or drone bases, which are spread out across the country, and they have no access to our nuclear assets that are deep underground as well. They can destroy structures on the surface, on the ground, but the key installations are not on the ground. In addition to that, uh, Israeli warheads are much smaller than Iranian warheads. The Iranians are firing missiles with warheads of, say, 1,000 kilos. Israeli warheads are, I think, 140 kilos or so. So the Iranian strikes on Tel Aviv and elsewhere cause much greater damage, and the Israeli regime is much smaller. So the psychological impact is much greater. When they strike Tehran, sometimes I don't hear it, or when the air defenses are active in Iran in other parts of the city, I don't hear it. That's how big the city is. You yourself live in New York. I think, but if something is happening in some other part of New York, you probably won't know. But in Tel Aviv, that's the heart of the regime, and striking the heart of the regime is also going to have a very long-term impact. Foreigners, businesses will not want to be in a city where they are vulnerable to such heavy strikes. In any case, we are prepared for this war, and we are the victim. The world has seen the Israeli regime as the aggressor, and the world has seen Western regimes as supporting aggression. And they've seen how the International Atomic Energy Agency has been politicized by the West that supports aggression. And this is just a continuation of the decline of the image of the West in the eyes of the world. I think it's quite clear that this puts Iran to a great advantage, because across the world, people see Iran as, along with Yemen, as the sole defenders of Gaza, the sole states that are actively opposing the genocide. And now they see Iran as a victim where the Israeli regime and the United States are carrying out strikes and murdering innocent people in order to continue the genocide. The West does not benefit from this. The United States does not benefit from this. it only destroys their image further. It destroys their credibility further, and it destroys the image of the Israeli regime even more than before, even though it has already been almost utterly destroyed. So the regime may have had certain advantages by carrying out a sudden strike, although Iran was prepared, but I think it wasn't prepared for strikes against senior officials. But they did have that advantage. But that also makes it clear to the eyes of the world that Iran is the victim, and that not only unifies society further, especially with the slaughter of women and children, but it shows the international community who is the aggressor, despite Western media, despite the attempts of Western regimes to justify that the behavior of the regime. And one final point that I should add, and that is that Netanyahu has been lying for 40 years that Iran is on the verge of making nuclear weapons, and Western media will always repeat those lies. They won't tell people that he's been saying this for 40 years, and Western governments will do the same. But the fact is that the centers, the installations that the Israeli regime has been striking, they are all closely monitored by the International Atomic Energy Agency. In other words, the International Atomic Energy Agency, their officials enter these buildings. They go to these buildings. They know exactly what goes on in these buildings. And so it's clear that the regime is lying.
The surprise factor is gone. Israel was able to conduct a surprise attack. This is something that Israel at a lower level against Iran has been conducting already for years. We know that Iran has been attacked. Nuclear scientists have been killed. These covert operations, Ismail Haniyeh. Now that is gone. And the initial goal of the operation was to eliminate Iran's nuclear sites. But now Iran's air defenses are completely activated. And Iran is speaking in this manner. I want your reaction to this. They're saying it's as long as it takes, and they're ready to continue to not only defend themselves, but of course, strike back for as long as Israel is going to commit to this. Now, what it is saying, it's going to burn Tehran to the ground. So, your thoughts about this dynamic here?
Well, this just shows what sort of monsters rule in occupied Palestine, that they burn or they want to burn cities to the ground. They burn Beirut to the ground. They burn Gaza to the ground. These are vicious animals. They are utterly evil. But Iran knows how to defend itself, and Iran will defend itself. And Iran will make the regime pay a heavy price. Iran will make sure that the regime is defeated and that it has to back down. So there's no doubt about it that Iran will be steadfast. People are united. You know, one of the things that you often hear in the West, which is quite extraordinary, it's been going on for many, many years, but they always say that the Iranian regime, as they like to call it, is on the verge of collapse. The people hate it. It's corrupt. It's incompetent. It's, and all we need to do is give it a little push and it's finished. And they've been saying that over the past few weeks a lot, and especially over the past few days. And that Israeli analysts, these Zionist monsters who do soft power work for the regime, they've been saying that too. But okay, the war has started. Where are the people? Netanyahu has called on Iranians to rise up against the regime. Okay, what's happened? You see people on the streets. We saw people across the country on the streets yesterday protesting, demanding that the armed forces and the government retaliate. And then last night we saw celebrations across the country where people were celebrating. And we saw people on the streets in Iran as Israeli drones were flying overhead, people on the streets chanting death to Israel. So where are these analysts? Of course, they will never change. They will continue to repeat the same narratives. But all we see is the opposite, in fact. People are more united today than I've seen for decades.
Of course, you have the United States' response here of sending all of its destroyers essentially to protect Israel. You have the Trump administration continuing to clamor for negotiations. Now, Iran's position, as of our speaking, has been, of course, one that is attempting to balance a lot here. But Iran has, for now, said they will not negotiate with the United States while this is happening. Your thoughts about the U.S. response, because Iran has said they'll do this for as long as it takes, defend themselves for as long as it takes. However, the United States has a lot of considerations here, including the fact that Iran has promised that if the US gets directly involved, we know that it sent hundreds of Hellfire missiles to Israel before the initial phase of this operation conducted by Israel. But if the United States gets more involved directly, that US assets, as you have predicted, US assets will be targeted across the region. So, your thoughts about the developments relating to the United States here, because we know that the Israeli regime can't operate without it.
Yes, it's quite clear that without the U.S.-Israeli regime, would not even be able to continue its Holocaust in Gaza, let alone wage some sort of war with Iran. But even with full U.S. support, the regime is going to fail. But what it does do is it shows Trump to be a warmongering monster, just like every other U.S. president. And those Trump supporters who were hoping that he would not engage in conflict and who were saying that he's different from the others, uh, they've all been proven wrong. And just as I said yesterday before the Iranian response, I said that there's no doubt that the Iranians will respond, and the response will be very severe and heavy-handed. If the United States engages directly in a conflict with Iran, the Iranian response will be heavy-handed and very severe, and that will bring down the global economy because the Persian Gulf is too vulnerable. The oil and gas assets there will be destroyed. There will be no more exports. And all these Arab dictatorships, these family regimes in the Persian Gulf, they'll be swept away. They cannot last under such circumstances. And that would bring about a collapse. And I think then those warmongers in the United States and the media, the neocons, the Zionists, they'll be hiding because people will be searching for them when the price of gasoline goes to what, like $20 a gallon, $25 a gallon, and the U.S. economy shuts down. I think people will be searching for the advocates of such a situation. So Iran is very serious, and Iran has no other option. If the United States enters the fray, Iran will have to respond, and those family dictatorships in the Persian Gulf that host U.S. bases, they will be complicit. So hopefully, Trump will not be insane enough to take such a step. But already he is deeply involved, and that is going to have consequences. And the Iranians are, as you pointed out, they have decided not to negotiate. And if Iran does negotiate at some point in the future, it's going to be a different a different set of negotiation strategies. Iran is going to be much tougher because the United States has proven itself to be extremely dishonest. We now see, as we expected to be true, that Trump was in fact conspiring with Netanyahu to carry out this attack, but pretending to be opposed to an attack. There's been a lot of talk in the Western media how this was effective. It wasn't. The Iranians they were prepared for an attack. And the only mistake that Iran made was that it didn't think that the regime would attack senior Iranian military and civilian figures and academics. And that, I think, is itself a major mistake by the Israeli regime, because now the people are rallying around the armed forces and the nuclear program, and it is going to make Iranians much tougher than before and much more prepared for the days and weeks to come, because we are, as I said before, we are the victims. So what Trump has done is that he's shown himself not to just be shifting his position all the time and flip-flopping, but it also shows that as the head of the United States, as the president of the United States, what he says is meaningless. because he may actually be thinking something else different from what he's saying in public. In other words, he's completely dishonest, and therefore he cannot be trusted at the negotiating table or anywhere else. And that is going to hurt the United States internationally, because if there is no even any agreement between any country has to have some sort of trust in it, that the other side will abide. If you don't believe the other side is going to abide by a deal, then what's the purpose of negotiating? So Trump has undermined the credibility of the United States even further by this stupid behavior, this foolish behavior, which I think he somehow thought it was brilliant, but this is not a game at school. This is international politics and international relations.
Yeah, and that's what's so interesting about this, Professor Marandi, because initially this was meant to be a really what seemed to be a heavy decapitation strike that was supposed to, as you said, there was a shock factor to this. Iran wasn't prepared to, especially with targeting of their military leadership. But that this strike, I believe, the initial strike was supposed to be the crippling strike for Iran, and now it's obviously that it hasn't been. And so I'm curious on your final thoughts, perhaps, on now what? Because it seems like if this is going to be a war of attrition, that's going to be a very challenging phenomena to navigate, a development to navigate for the US and Israeli side. Of course, the Iranian side has its own particular um, interests and needs and dynamics that you can also speak on, perhaps. But maybe talk about this full picture of like, now what from here? Because as long as it takes, if Iran is serious about this, and now we've seen, Professor Marandi, you've been saying Operation True Promise 3 will come. Now it is here. Now we can see that, yes, Iran is serious. So your comment on the kind of like now what happens as we enter what is now a protracted conflict?
It's difficult to say, Danny, because Netanyahu is the boss, and his self-preservation is his top priority, and that's why he needs escalation and conflict and war across the board. That's why we're in this situation, and that's why we've been in this situation for well over 20 months now. And on the other hand, the U.S. president, as the leader of another rogue regime, he is completely unpredictable. So who can predict what he's going to say in a couple of hours when he wakes up or when he wakes up now on Truth Social? The Iranians are prepared for war, and they're going to fight that war. And they are the victims of this war, and they're going to punish the aggressor. And come what may, that is what they're going to continue to do. I think I once spoke about this on your show, Danny. Iran is deeply, it's a religious society, and it's deeply influenced by the prophet, obviously, and his son-in-law, and his grandson. And his son-in-law was very much known for social justice and struggling for the poor, and his grandson was known for martyrdom in Karbala and standing up against the oppressor and the despot of his era for the sake of the people. And his sister, who was also in Karbala, is a key figure in our culture as being steadfast and the voice of the resistance and the voice of the oppressed. This is very much a part of our culture. We are going to be steadfast. We are going to continue defending the Palestinian people, and we will not be intimidated by the United States or the Zionist regime or their allies. And our cause is just. Our cause is to support the people of Palestine, to end the Holocaust and to end discrimination and ethnic cleansing. And we are right and they are wrong. We are good and they are evil. It's very clear. It's very clear. It's very clear. The what we're seeing in Gaza is as clear as day. Those who support the genocidal regime are the enemies of humanity. Those who continue to do business and trade with the regime are the enemies of humanity. Those who continue to have political ties with the regime are the enemies of humanity. Iran is opposed to this, and that is why Iran is targeted. Iran is saying that the ethno-supremacist regime in Palestine must come to an end, and that Jews, Christians, and Muslims must be treated as equal human beings. And this is what is outrageous to the West. This is completely unacceptable to Western media and Western elites. In private, Danny, many Western journalists and elites that I've spoken to in private, they acknowledge all of this. So I have no doubt that Iran will see this through, and that the regime will regret this. And it will be another key step to bringing an end to apartheid in Palestine and this racist regime. Because the failure in this war, I think, will create a great deal. I think a lot of Zionists will be disillusioned after this war ends. And I think many educated Zionists will leave because Israel is no longer that safe place that they thought it was. And the West no longer has the sort of resources just to keep pouring it in for this ethno-supremacist regime. I don't see the future of the Israeli regime as being good at all. I see it as moving towards demise.